Oh, hey, it's you. Come on in. You're just in time for another edition of PsychFlix. And today you're in for a real treat. We're doing another musical again today. This week it's going to be Into the Woods. Hi, welcome back, and I'm Jess Willens, and this is PsychFlix, where each week we analyze a current or popular movie from a psychological perspective, usually just zeroing in on one character, trying to worm our way into their heads so that you can better understand the characters that you love or hate. So, as you know, last week we discussed the new movie and musical Annie, and this week we're discussing the new movie musical Into the Woods. So it seems like we're kind of on a theme of musicals. So I was thinking maybe we could change the name from PsychFlix to Psychicals. You know, like psychology musical. No, how about Psychway? You know, like psychology on Broadway? And I think we'll just stick with PsychFlix. Like I said in the introduction, normally we focus on one character and discuss the psychology of one character. But if you've seen Into the Woods, or if you're familiar with that musical and play, then you know that it's very, very difficult to just focus on one character. Now, I don't know if any of you guys remember back to any kind of some sort of human development course you may have taken in college, even an introductory human development course, and I guarantee you would have learned about Erik Erikson's stages of life development. Now, Erikson's stages of life development have proved so almost right on that they continue to get used years later, and even newer research on attachment and neuroscience seems to confirm these different stages that Erikson has. So the first one for an infant is trust versus mistrust. Then in early childhood, you get two that really, I think, kind of can be combined, is you get autonomy and initiative versus shame and doubt. And then up into older childhood, you get industry versus inferiority. Now then you get into adolescence, and the first thing is identity versus role confusion, extremely important for adolescence. And then farther on into adolescence, the next one is intimacy versus isolation, and that's more young adulthood. Then on into adulthood, you get generativity, like you work hard, versus stagnation. And then the end of life is integrity versus despair. You know, can you look back on your life with an idea of that I was successful and that I can look back on what I did with integrity, or am I going to look back on it with despair? The reason why I'm mentioning all of this is because I think Into the Woods kind of covers all of those different bases. And you think the first stage of trust versus mistrust. Now you actually see that near the end of the movie, but it's when the baker has a child. And I actually like how they show that after his wife dies, the baker has to contemplate whether or not he stays and takes care of his child, or whether or not he runs away from his responsibilities, as you find out that his father also had done. The next two stages in childhood of being autonomy and initiative, I think we see some of that with Jack. He's going to take Milky White off to the marketplace all on his own, and he's going to be a big boy, and he's going to go sell his cow that was his best friend, but he's growing up and learning that, you know, sometimes you have to part from your childhood friends.
Straight to the woods and don't delay, we have to face the marketplace, into the woods to journey's end.
Into the woods to sell a friend.
The next stage also of childhood ends up being industry versus inferiority, and, you know, do kids learn how to work hard? And certainly we see Jack having to cope with that. We even see his mom having to cope with that, as he doesn't work quite as hard as she needs him to. She kind of needs him to work like a man, as his father, you know, apparently abandoned them. Now, then you get into the sort of the adolescent years, and the first one is identity versus role confusion. And I think you see that in abundance with the character of Little Red Riding Hood. And she's trying to figure out her identity, who she is. And throughout the entire play, but she has a few a few experiences that I think help to define her. And as she has that, first encounter with the wolf, and then as she processes that afterward.
And take extra care with strangers, even flowers have their dangers, and though scary is exciting, nice is different than good.
She's starting to get an identity of herself. She's starting to realize that, hey, the world has some dangerous things, but I can make it through.
Now I know, don't be scared, Granny is right, just be prepared. Isn't it nice to know a lot? And a little bit not.
The next stage is intimacy versus isolation. And, you see that with numerous characters in this play. And that's a very common one to show. Any movie that you've ever seen where people date and fall in love and get married, that's the stage of life. So that's kind of the most popular stage in life to portray, and there's numerous characters who go through that. I think you have a little bit of that even with the baker and his wife, certainly with Cinderella and her prince, as well as Rapunzel and her prince, and obviously as the princes are trying to figure out why these women aren't responding to them the way they think they should, and they have that great scene, agony, as they're discussing the agony that they feel over over unrequited love.
Agony, misery, although it's different for each. Always 10 steps behind, always 10 feet below, and she's just out of reach. Agony.
And that's classic intimacy versus isolation. That's what we can all relate to that. We've all experienced that. And then, the final stages of adulthood with generativity versus stagnation. You kind of see that with the baker, and as he's, wrestling over whether or not to stay and fulfill his responsibilities or run away. Now, the last stage of life of integrity versus despair, I think that was actually showed better in the play with the baker's dad. And the baker's dad was cut out of the movie. I don't necessarily have a problem with it. I think it worked fairly well for the movie. But it did eliminate that final stage of life, as certainly the baker's dad looked back on his life with despair, despairing over the choices he made. He was not able to look back on his life with integrity, and he just wanted his son to make better choices than he had done. But there's one other thing that I want to focus on here at the end regarding Into the Woods as a psychological movie. Psychology, historically, has sort of been focused on what goes wrong with people in life. And how can we help people deal with the things that go wrong? But there's a new movement that says, well, maybe instead of focusing on what has gone wrong, maybe we can focus on how to make things go right so that people don't have serious issues. And this is called the positive psychology. It's very in-depth about how do we make people resilient so that the difficulties of life don't end up leading to mental health issues. What positive psychology has looked at is can we find a way to help people be more resilient so that those stressful, difficult situations don't end up triggering some sort of mental health issue that someone may have been predisposed to. And so that's called resiliency. And I happen to have a book that I have right here in my office. It's called Raising a Self-Disciplined Child. Help your child become more responsible, confident, and resilient. And obviously, if you're talking about building resiliency, you're talking about building resiliency to difficult and stressful situations. And that's where it gets back to the show Into the Woods. Obviously, all of the characters go through very difficult and stressful situations in this. But what you also see, and I think what we all like about it, is those characters always learn something from those difficult and stressful situations. And you see them discussing the situation with someone else, usually in form of a song, but that's great, and that's part of what makes it moving and powerful for us to watch. And so basically, I highly recommend that you sing yourself through all of your problems. No, you don't have to sing, but discussing the difficulties in life with someone else helps you to understand better what it is you're going through, helps you to figure out how you can understand what's happened, what you can learn from it, and how you can sort of move on, but with hopefully a little bit stronger of a internal character and fortitude and foundation. So in conclusion, I think that what we can take away from the play, the musical, the movie, Into the Woods, is that life is really just a lot more complicated than many of us realize. And I think one of the points that Stephen Sondheim wants to make is that we never really have everything all completely figured out. Now that doesn't mean that there aren't standards and values, shouldn'ts and shoulds.
There are vows, there are ties, there are needs, there are standards, there are shouldn'ts and shoulds,
as the baker's wife sings about. But while we have certain values and standards and shouldn'ts and shoulds, we need to be open to learning. We need to realize that we don't have it all quite figured out. We need to be willing to learn for whatever life throws our way. I would just challenge you to look at your own life that way. And with every struggle you have to go through, what is it that you can learn that you didn't know before? So in conclusion, if you like this, I encourage you to subscribe to Lane Levanway's YouTube channel, Cine-Love, where you can get all of his movie reviews as well as my PsychFlix shows. And so please hit subscribe over here. And also, if you're interested in learning more about psychology, please see my blog, The Unveiled Self. And until next week, this is PsychFlix. So now that I've explained all that to you, isn't it nice to know a lot? And a little bit not.